Welcome to Dark Tales, a place where we dive into the eerie, the unexplained, and the terrifying stories. So, sit back, turn off the lights, and get ready to be scared. Story 1. The Silent Stalker. Working as a night security guard seemed like a pretty easy gig. Just sit in front of some screens, walk around the site a few times, and maybe deal with the occasional teenager trying to sneak in. That's what I signed up for when I took this job at a construction site a couple of years back. The place was just a bunch of half-finished buildings, some tools locked up in containers, and equipment covered by tarps. It should have been routine. But there was one particular night, that changed how I looked at the entire job forever. It started like any other shift. I was in the security booth, sipping coffee and keeping an eye on the cameras. It was quiet, as usual. The only sounds were the occasional gust of wind and the faint hum of a nearby generator. Around midnight, I decided to do my rounds. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking around the site. Everything seemed normal, but as I rounded the corner of one of the unfinished buildings, I saw something, or rather someone, standing in the distance. At first, I thought it was just one of the construction workers who forgot something, but the figure wasn't moving. It was just standing there, completely still, staring at one of the walls. I called out, "Hey, you're not supposed to be here," but there was no response. I started walking toward them, thinking they hadn't heard me, but as I got closer, the figure seemed to disappear behind the wall. I quickened my pace, trying to catch up, but when I turned the corner, no one was there. The place was empty. I felt a cold chill run down my spine, but I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. I went back to the security booth and checked the cameras. I didn't expect to see anything, but then, on one of the screens, I spotted that same figure standing by the building again. This time I zoomed in, trying to get a better look, but as I did, the camera started glitching, the image becoming distorted and static-filled. I couldn't make out any details. I sat there, staring at the screen, waiting for something to happen. And then it did. The figure started moving again, slowly walking toward one of the storage containers. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to go out there and confront whoever it was, but the other part of me, the part that was scared out of its mind, wanted to stay inside the booth and lock the door. Suddenly, the figure vanished from the screen, just like that. I switched between cameras, trying to figure out where it had gone, but it was like it had disappeared into thin air. I sat there for the next hour, eyes glued to the monitors, but nothing happened. The site was still, almost too still. The silence felt heavy, like the air had thickened. At around 2:30 a.m., I heard something that made my blood run cold, a soft tapping sound coming from the window of the security booth. It was subtle at first, like someone lightly knocking on the glass. My heart stopped. Slowly, I turned my head toward the window, praying that it was just my imagination. But it wasn't. Standing right outside the booth, only a few feet away, was the figure. Its face was hidden by the shadows, but I could see its outline, tall and motionless. The tapping continued, slow and steady, like it was waiting for me to do something. I couldn't move. I was frozen in my chair, my mind racing with fear. My flashlight was within reach, but I couldn't bring myself to grab it. All I could do was stare. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. No sound, no footsteps, just gone. The tapping stopped, and the silence returned, even heavier than before. I sat there shaking until my shift ended at 6 a.m. When the morning crew arrived, I packed up my things and left without saying a word. I never went back. I didn't even pick up my last paycheck. Some things just aren't worth it. To this day, I don't know what I saw that night, but I do know this. Whatever it wasn't human. Story 2. The Glowing Eyes. I worked the night shift at this old rundown hotel for a few months. It was the kind of place that people only stayed in if they had no other options. Outdated decor, flickering lights, creaky floors, the whole creepy package. The building was old, really old, and everyone who worked there had a story about something strange happening. I didn't pay much attention to those stories. I figured they were just trying to mess with the new guy. But then, one night, I had my own experience, and let's just say I wasn't laughing anymore. It was a slow night. We only had a handful of guests checked in, and most of them were asleep. I was sitting in the back office scrolling through my phone when something on the security monitor caught my eye. On the third-floor camera, I saw something standing at the far end of the hallway. At first, I thought it was a guest, maybe someone coming back from a late-night walk, but then I noticed something strange. The figure wasn't moving. It was just standing there, perfectly still. I zoomed in on the camera, trying to get a better look. That's when I saw its eyes. Glowing eyes. Two bright yellow orbs staring directly into the camera. My stomach dropped. There was no way those were normal eyes. I stared at the screen, half expecting the figure to move, but it didn't. It just stood there, staring. I checked the other cameras. No one else was on that floor, and there hadn't been any movement in the hallway all night. I started to feel uneasy, but I figured I had to check it out. After all, it could have been a guest who needed help. I grabbed my keycard and headed up to the third floor, even though my gut was telling me not to. When I stepped off the elevator, the hallway was completely empty. I walked toward the spot where I'd seen the figure, but there was no one there. No glowing eyes, no figure, nothing. The air felt colder in that part of the hallway, though, and the floor was damp. I bent down to touch it, and it was wet, like someone had been standing there in the rain. But there hadn't been any rain that night. I started to walk back to the elevator when I heard a noise, a soft whisper, like someone calling my name. I froze in place, my heart racing. The whisper came again, louder this time, but there was no one around. I backed up slowly, my eyes scanning the hallway, and then I saw it. The figure was back, standing at the far end of the hall, staring at me. Its eyes glowed brighter than before, piercing through the darkness. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I ran back to the office and locked the door. When I looked at the camera feed, the figure was gone, just like that. I never told anyone what I saw, but I quit that job a week later. I couldn't shake the feeling that those eyes were still watching me, waiting for me to come back. Story 3. The Patient Who Never Left. Being a night shift nurse has its ups and downs. Most of the time it's quiet. Just you, the patients, and the hum of machines keeping the rhythm of the night. I've seen some weird things during my years on the job, but there's one experience that still sends chills down my spine whenever I think about it. I used to work at this old hospital in the city. It had been around for decades, and a lot of the staff believed it was haunted. They'd tell stories about strange sounds, shadows moving in empty hallways and doors opening by themselves. But the one room everyone seemed to avoid talking about was room 306. Apparently, years before I started working there, a patient had died under really weird circumstances in that room. After that, strange things started happening. You'd hear about nurses seeing figures in the corner of their eye, or patients talking to someone who wasn't there. I didn't really believe in any of that. I figured it was just hospital gossip, and I wasn't going to let some old stories freak me out. That is, until I had my own encounter with room 306. One night we were short-staffed, and I had to admit a patient to room 306. I didn't think much of it at the time. The patient was an elderly man, quiet, didn't seem to mind the room. Everything was fine until about 3 a.m. when his call button went off. I made my way down the dimly lit hallway, feeling a little uneasy for some reason. When I got to the room, the man was lying in bed, fast asleep. His vitals were normal, and there was no sign of distress. I figured he must have hit the button by accident, so I turned it off and left. Not even 10 minutes later, the call button went off again. This time, when I got to the room, the man was wide awake, staring at the corner of the room. His eyes were wide with fear, and he looked like he was trying to say something, but no sound came out. I asked him if he was okay, but he just kept staring at the corner, trembling. I looked over to where he was staring, and there was nothing there, just the empty room. But the air felt wrong, heavy, like something was pressing down on me. I asked the man again if he needed help, and he finally whispered, "She won't stop watching me." Chills ran down my spine. I looked around again, but there was no one else in the room. I tried to calm him down, told him it was just a bad dream, but he wouldn't stop staring at that corner. Eventually, he fell back asleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next morning, I checked his chart and noticed something strange. The previous patients who had stayed in room 306, they had all complained about the same thing, someone standing in the corner watching them while they slept. I don't work at that hospital anymore, but to this day, I still wonder who or what was in that room with him. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss what's lurking in the shadows next. Sleep tight, if you can.